Okay, this is a short video to go along with Chapter 19 questions. Chapter 19 questions are covering the period 1854 to 1861. Chapter 19 questions, a couple of hints and a couple of explanations. And just a reminder that the images within this PowerPoint or within this presentation, the images are in the public domain. Please don't hesitate to give me an email or a call if you have any questions. Thank you. Chapter 19 questions beginning on page 396 start off with some talk of Harriet Beecher Stowe book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and we will spend some time talking more about the influence of Uncle Tom's Cabin and Harriet Beecher Stowe. We'll talk more about that in the PowerPoint. So read the first couple pages of the chapter to get the first questions here. But as we get down to number 6 and 7 in your worksheet, what strategy did this New England Immigrant Aid Society or Aid Company use with regards to Kansas, and what were the Beecher's Bibles? So you'll find those answers on page 398 in your textbook. And the most famous of these anti-slavery organizations was the New England Immigrant Aid Company, which sent about 2,000 people to the troubled area of Kansas to forestall the South and also to make a profit, shouting "Ho for Kansas." Many of them carried the deadly new breech-loading Sharps rifles. These rifles then were nicknamed Beecher's Bibles after the Reverend Harry Ward Beecher. So in Kansas, those that were armed with rifles, Sharps rifles, were called Beecher's Bibles. Then we move down to number 8 in your worksheet, number 8. According to the census of 1860, what was the population of Kansas, and then how many slaves were actually in Kansas? You'll find the answer on page 399. And when you look at this, the census of 1860, just prior to the Civil War, the census found only 2 slaves of the 107,000 souls in Kansas Territory, and only 15 slaves in Nebraska. And so ultimately Bleeding Kansas and this popular sovereignty debate both in Kansas and Nebraska was so political because obviously it was only going to affect maybe 2 slaves or 15 slaves. So it was clear to many that this was a political argument for the South. And so here's also then a picture of a Beecher's Bible. And we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that in the PowerPoint as well. John Brown becomes famous. We'll spend some time in the PowerPoint talking about John Brown. And Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts becomes a very important character as well. And Sumner gets entangled into a very interesting issue that you can read about on page 401. He becomes beaten by Senator Brooks from South Carolina, I believe. The Sumner-Brooks clash. Read about that on page 400 and 401 to find the answers there to 11 and 12. We'll move on to the next page now. On the second page of your worksheet, I want to focus a bit on the Dred Scott bombshell, and you'll find this headline on page 403 in your textbook. And so look at question number 16 and 17 and getting into 18. So when President Buchanan is inaugurated, we have the very famous Dred Scott Supreme Court case. Supreme Court Chief Justice is Roger Taney, and so spend some time on page 403 reading about this. But you will see that Buchanan's short honeymoon period was abruptly ended 2 days after his inauguration. And then on the next page here, the Supreme Court Justice, his name is Roger Taney, and this black slave, his name is Dred Scott. Black slave that has lived with his master for 5 years in Illinois and Wisconsin. Backed by abolitionists, he sues for his freedom because in Illinois and Wisconsin they are free territories, but because his owner, Dred Scott's owner, has moved from the South to Illinois and to Wisconsin, Dred Scott feels like he should be free because he is on free soil. His residence is on free soil. So it goes to the Supreme Court. And just spend some time reading about that on page 403. And it's very, very important landmark decision. The next part of the worksheet I want to focus on is on page 406, and we'll look at number 22, 23, and 24, and some of the things here on page 406. And legend to the contrary, Douglas and some of the free, legend to the contrary, Douglas and some of the Southerners had already publicly answered the Freeport Doctrine. So Douglas is the little giant. And down here it talks about, where is it here? Douglas argued that slavery would stay down if the people voted it down. Laws to protect slavery would have to be passed by territorial legislators. So that's the answer to number 22. Number 23, the upshot. The upshot was Douglas defeated Lincoln for the Senate seat. And then here at the end, number 24. Senators were chosen at this time. Senators were chosen by state legislators. In the general election that followed the debates, more pro-Douglas members were electors than pro-Lincoln members. It's kind of a technicality, but in 1860, to become a United States senator, you did not have to be elected by the people of your state. You were elected by the state legislators from your state. Senators were chosen by state legislators. And so during the Lincoln-Douglas debate, even though Lincoln was popular with the people and his debating skills helped him become the more popular candidate, because the people were not involved specifically, directly with the choosing of their senator, Douglas goes on to win. So kind of a technicality, but by whom were senators elected in 1858? By whom? They were elected by state legislators, not by direct election of the people. So that's the answer to that question. Alright, at that point, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about some of that in the PowerPoint. I'll move on to the next slide, next page of the worksheet. Now on this last slide, on this last page of the worksheet, I wanted to focus some on number 33. Upon Lincoln's election, so Lincoln wins the presidential election of 1860. Upon his election, what were some of the Southern political strengths, and were these strengths fully appreciated by the South? So if we look at this on page 412, the second full paragraph on page 412. So when Lincoln gets elected, the South, despite their electoral defeat, was not badly off. They still had, this is an advantage, a political advantage, a 5-4 majority on the Supreme Court. And although the Republicans elected Lincoln, the Republicans neither controlled the Senate nor the House of Representatives. The federal government could not touch slavery in those states where it existed except by a constitutional amendment, and such an amendment could be defeated by only 1/4 of the states. The 15 slave states numbered nearly half of the total. 16 free states, 15 slave states. 1/4 of those 29, 16 free, 15 slave. So you have a total of 31 states. And it says by 1/4 of the states, 1/4 of the total 31 could defeat a constitutional amendment. And so the South was not really in any major danger of losing slavery. The question is, did they appreciate this? Did they fully appreciate this? So take a look. Number 33. Whoops. Upon Lincoln's election, what were some of the Southern political strengths? They had Republican advantages in the House they had political advantages in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. They had advantage on the Supreme Court, and it required a 3/4 majority, or 1/4 of the states could defeat a constitutional amendment attempt to abolish slavery. So hopefully you can grasp some of that on page 412. That pretty much concludes some of the hints here, some of the suggestions for Chapter 19 worksheet questions out of the textbook. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email or call me. And again, a reminder that all of these images are in the public domain. I guess last thing here, I wanted to point out this very famous image of Sumner being beaten by Brooks in the United States Senate. Take a look again on page 401. Page 401, you'll see this image, and spend some time reading about the Southern chivalry that existed. Thank you.